Hey guys, welcome to digit.in, and today we're reviewing the Alienware M15 R2. Now this is the new version of the laptop with an Intel Core i9-9980HK processor. I've spent over 2 weeks with this machine, testing it thoroughly with games, Lightroom, Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, and in the process what we've done is we've recorded a lot of thermal readings, we've overclocked the processor, we've undervolted the processor, recorded temperatures, and there's actually a whole lot to talk about. So keep watching this review further if you want to know exactly how this laptop performed in our slew of tests. Let's get started. Now before we actually get into the performance of the laptop, let's get first some basics out of the way. This particular Alienware M15 R2 that Dell sent us over for review has an Intel Core i9-99HK processor. It's got 16 gigs of RAM on board. It's got a 1TB NVMe storage drive by Micron, and it's got a 4K OLED 60Hz panel for display. It's HDR enabled, yes. First, when it comes to the design, Dell Alienware has finally upgraded the M15 to the new industrial legend design language. What that means is you get this really slick machine with honeycomb patterns all over, some really aggressive looking exhaust vents, but at the same time, Alienware M15 R2 does not feel like it's a gaming laptop. It doesn't have those traditional black, red, sharp angles, none of that. It's actually got a very soft look, and the lunar white variant that we have would actually pass off in any office environment as a decent work laptop. All you have to do is just turn off the RGB and you're good to go. So in terms of design, the laptop is definitely impressive. It's under an inch thick and it weighs only 2.1 kilograms for a gaming laptop. Design wise, I think Dell really did a good job, or rather Alienware did a really good job with this laptop. Now this, guys, I very strongly recommend you should get some popcorn. This is going to be a long one. First, I want to talk to you about 4K HDR gaming. Now why 4K HDR? That's because the 4K OLED panel tops out at 60Hz refresh rate. Now if you're going to use a 4K OLED panel and it only allows up to 60Hz of gaming, so why not test it at the resolution that it offers, because refresh rate is definitely not there. So first off, with Gears of War 5, or rather Gears 5, we got 44 FPS. Forza Horizon 4 gave us 56 FPS. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was at 34 FPS. Now mind you, all of these games are running not only at 4K HDR but also at their highest graphic settings. Battlefield 5 topped out at 37. Metro Exodus was 25 FPS. Doom went all the way to 60 because it's actually a pretty easy game on most hardware. So now these are some of the numbers for games at 4K resolution. We also have the same games running at 2K and 1080p, and you can see exactly what sort of frame rates you got. We used an external monitor for this one, and this is all during stock settings. The CPU is running at stock, the GPU is running at stock, the fan is running at its stock settings. Nothing has been tweaked. And the CPU temperature obviously hits 100. The clock speeds come down to about 3.4 gigahertz. The WASD keys hit 55 degrees and the vents are at about 72 degrees. Pretty hot. Managed to undervolt this system and brought the temperatures down to about 38 degrees on the WASD keys. The CPU temps did keep hitting 100, but well, that's that. Now interestingly, there is a way to improve things in terms of thermals beyond just undervolting, and that's where the Alienware Command Center comes in. The Alienware Command Center is supposed to be the one-stop shop where you can adjust the lighting of your system, you can set power profiles, you can of course overclock, and also set custom fan curves. So interestingly, the default fan curve is actually very conservative. It prioritizes staying quiet over keeping the CPU cool, and this we notice while gaming, while doing renders from Lightroom, while rendering 4K footage in Adobe Premiere as well. So this is a very critical piece of software to get the most out of your Alienware M15 R2. Sadly, good luck getting it to work. It took me 6 days to do that. It's not going to get into the problem or the frustrations of it, but if you do get it to work, the first thing you should do is set a custom fan curve, and that will really help with the thermals, like really. And while it may not help so much keeping the CPU below 100, it does keep the WASD keys a lot cooler. In fact, the entire keyboard island runs a lot cooler. So there's that. Custom fan curves are your friend. Overclocking on this is not really necessary. The i9 9980HK is actually powerful enough to do whatever you may throw at it just fine. And honestly, I would not ever recommend that you render a 2-hour-long 4K file from Adobe Premiere while you have a CPU overclocked. It's running at 100 degrees. It's really going to hurt your system. So don't do that. When you're rendering, keep your CPU at stock, run the fans at max, and you're good to go. Like I told you guys, undervolting does help. And in case you're wondering about some of the numbers in terms of performance, while exporting 500 raw files of 48 megapixels, the clock speed did not go below 3.2 gigahertz on all cores, so that's still pretty impressive. And the M15 R2 actually managed to export this batch of files in the fastest time we have ever seen, 10 minutes, whereas everybody else, all of the laptops we've tested so far have been about 18 minutes and higher. Like the second fastest laptop clocked a time of 17 minutes and 48 seconds. So, you know, there's take from that what you will. 4K, OLED, HDR, but 60 Hz. This is a gaming laptop. Feels more like something for creators, but it's not. Great for content consumption, and the gaming visuals, if you're playing with HDR enabled in 4K, are absolutely brilliant. Honestly, I would recommend that you turn the resolution down to 2K. Things still look amazing, and you still get HDR and you get slightly better frame rates. So there is that. It's definitely not for competitive gaming because of the 60 Hz refresh rate. But here's the sad part. The OLED display is also not that great for creators. And that's because when you dim the display, when you change the brightness, the properties of the colors that are being displayed also change. The hue slightly shifts. So color accuracy becomes an issue, unless of course you use an external monitor, which is color calibrated. You could color calibrate this monitor as well, but it will only work at one specific brightness. You change the brightness and the calibration's out the window. The Alienware M15 R2's keyboard is one of the best I have used this year. I've been using an Asus ROG laptop, a SCAR machine. Up until now, that was sort of the benchmark for typing. It's so responsive and such good travel, but the Alienware machine has topped that as well. It's got 1.7 millimeters of travel. The actuation point is pretty low, and the keys are actually quite springy. They're not spongy, but they're firm and they strike back with very crisp action. It's sort of hard to explain, so I would just recommend you guys go out to a Dell store and just try typing on this thing. It's absolutely phenomenal. And while I would game on this laptop a lot, I would actually also work on this a lot. So all of my reviews have been typed on this in the last 2 weeks, and stories and everything. It's a treat, absolute. Making things better on this is of course the RGB. It's got perky RGB, and you can, you know, set it up with your custom color profiles, and you could also use a game's specific control profile to light up the keys. But the trackpad, however, is interestingly, it works very well. It's a glass trackpad, beautiful, very responsive, except for in one area, and that is scrolling. For some reason, when you scroll on this thing, there is like a minor half a second lag, and it's noticeable. It's definitely noticeable, to the point where you have to wonder, wait, did I even scroll on this page? And then you're like, no, maybe I didn't. So you do the swiping thing once again, and then, well, you've got extra scrolls coming in. So there is lag. Hopefully Dell can fix this with an update, but I just use an external mouse. It helps. Now, in terms of I/O, it's a very generous set. It's got all of the basics covered. You have 3 USB 3.1 ports. Great if you want to connect an external keyboard, mouse, maybe an external hard drive, peripherals. Essentially, you've got that covered. There's also a Thunderbolt 3 port at the back, which means you can connect either a Thunderbolt display, you can connect really fast storage, or you can connect a dongle which will give you access to more ports, maybe an Ethernet 10 gig port, maybe you can have 5 USB ports using an adapter, whatever. The idea is that you have a lot of options. There's also an HDMI 2.0 port at the back and a mini display port. so that you can connect more external monitors. So there's actually a lot of focus on that. And of course, there's also Alienware's own external graphics interface at the back, which you can use in case you think that the 2080 Max-Q is not enough for some reason. I wouldn't know why you would think that, or anybody for that matter. So overall, using this laptop has actually been a lot of fun. It's been really great. It's a great machine. There are 3 models available in India, and that's where my next section comes in. Now, Dell has brought 3 variants into India. The first one, the base variant, is powered by an Intel i7-9750 processor, comes with 8 GB of RAM, an NVIDIA RTX 2060, and a 240 Hz panel with 100% sRGB coverage. Pretty good. Then the second variant is again i7 with 16 GB of RAM, an NVIDIA RTX 2070 Max-Q, and a 4K OLED panel. And then the third variant is the one which we got with an i9-9980HK with 16 gigs of RAM, 4K OLED panel, and an NVIDIA 2080 Max-Q. The problem here is that the base variant starts at 1,60,000 plus 18% taxes, and in that all you get is 8 gigs of RAM. So you think, you know what, it's a great machine, I'll buy it. Problem, I'll upgrade the RAM. Only problem there is you can't upgrade the RAM. The RAM on the M15 R2 is now soldered onto the motherboard. Unlike the last year's variant, which actually had 2 DIMM slots where you could upgrade the RAM all the way up to 32 gigs. The M15 R2 only supports a maximum of 16 GB of RAM. It is soldered onto the board, so there is no scope for upgrades. The base variant feels like such a mismatch of components where you've got an NVIDIA RTX 2060, which is expected to power a 240 Hz or rather drive a 240 Hz monitor, but you also only have 8 gigs of RAM. Now, to the creators out there, this is something interesting you would want to know. Every time we performed a Lightroom export with raw files from a Nikon D800, here's what happened. Whether it was 50 files, 100 files, 200 files, or 500 files, we did these batch exports. The RAM usage jumped up to 11 gigs or at some points higher, which means if you buy the base variant of this laptop, you're going to run into issues. You want to export 4K footage from Premiere, which is let's say a 20-minute timeline, good luck. It needs another 12 gigs of RAM. 8 GB variant is going to struggle. So what you're left with is the 2 other higher variants, which both come in with 4K OLED panels, which, okay, as a creator you may think, fine, I'll use an external monitor for my color accuracy. The gamers who will feel left out, well, 60 Hz refresh rate for a laptop that costs more than 2 lakhs or even 3 lakhs in the case of the top end variant. It just feels like such a horrible mismatch. Now these same machines are available in the US from Dell with the right configurations where you can get 16 gigs of RAM on the base variant. So that's one, 0 upgradability, poor choice of component combinations. And then here's another thing, the motherboard is mounted backwards. So it's inverted, which means if few years down the line, you want to repaste your CPU and GPU with better thermal paste, not gonna happen, because taking that thing apart is hard. Okay, so those were the frustrating parts about the Alienware M15 R2. So let's conclude this review quickly. In terms of performance, the M15 R2 with the Intel Core i9-9980HK processor leaves absolutely no room for complaints. Yes, the fans get loud and they sound like a whiny, tinny thing, but you know, at the end of the day, it does not cause your CPU to melt down. It does not make you feel like your fingers are gonna melt. And of course, you don't want to keep this laptop in your lap. You want to game on this thing at 2K, it'll hit 60 FPS like that, and you'll enjoy those beautiful visuals. If you want to plug it into an external gaming monitor and drive higher frame rates at a lower resolution, you can do that too. But as a standalone, it has some weak points. The 60 Hz cap on an OLED is sad. Hopefully, Dell would have launched this laptop in the fast refresh rate variants as well, but you only get a fast refresh rate monitor on a laptop which is the base variant, does not have enough RAM, and that's that. So it's kind of like, you know, you want to mix and match these 2 machines or these 3 machines. If you can buy this from the US, you have far more options, but if you have to buy it from India, your options are limited and they're not the best configurations available either for gamers and neither for creators. So it's sort of somewhere in the middle. You could look at options from other manufacturers instead, which would not only be cheaper but also offer you better component combinations. So that's been our review of the Alienware M15 R2. Thank you guys for watching, and if you liked it, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. But if you have any further questions, leave them in the comments below and I will get back to you personally. Thank you guys for watching.